So I'm excited to welcome to the podcast Bob Glasscock, the creator of Casey at the Bat, the comic series, which has over 200 strips at this point. Bob and I are going to be sharing a table at the Rainbow Book Fair this coming Saturday, April 9th. That takes place at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice Student Dining Hall. And that's a mouthful of a location.
Yeah.
This is the second year we'll have done that, and Bob and I are also friends. We played hockey together in the New York City Gay Hockey Association for a number of years, possibly a decade. Does that sound right?
It does sound about right. Yeah.
Sounds about right, yeah. So, Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Introduce yourself and Casey to our listeners.
Well, my name is Bob Glasscock. I live in New York City. I'm a cartoonist with a day job. I started doing comics back when I was in high school and in college. I self-published my first comic, which was called Orb, in 1984. My current project, Casey the Bat, it's a gay-themed slice of life romantic soap opera that follows the title character Casey and his friends' adventures through life, love, and sports. It's a comic that started in when did it start? 2011.
Okay.
And now we're in our 5th year.
Yeah.
So it's going pretty strong.
Yeah, and over 200. That's impressive.
Yeah, I would have preferred. We publish once a week is our schedule that we do. I would have preferred to been a little further along after 5 years, but we had a little bit of scheduling problems the last year or so that slowed things down. But we're getting those back on track.
That's excellent. Is Orb, by the way, just as a sideline, is Orb still available for people who may want to find it?
No. Orb is very difficult to find. I have a stack, I have a stack of about maybe 50 or so that I still have from back in the day. I found them in my storage shed when I was cleaning out my storage shed. And I said, oh my Lord, I found these copies. I thought they were all gone. I was at a show in LA a couple of years ago, and I sold some copies of Orb there. And they actually sold, I couldn't believe it, for $1 a pop, and people were buying them. And I said, well, this is fun. I'm planning right now of maybe rebooting Orb and doing a sister series to Casey, so I have something that's more sword and sorcery and superhero adventure as opposed to the soap opera that is Casey. So I'm kind of holding back on selling copies of 30-year-old art.
Okay. Collector's items, then, for anybody that has them.
Also, I lost one of the pages. It was an 8-page comic, and I lost page 7.
Uh-oh.
I couldn't even do a reprint to make it look nicer and put it on the web. So, I thought about that, posting it on the web so people could see it, and it really looks bad. So, no. But you never know. I might do it.
So, back to Casey. What's Casey's origin?
Oh, Lordy. Well, as I said, I did that back in '84 after I did Casey. I moved to New York the next year, and I was kicking around comic ideas about what to do. I was looking at doing a more fuller follow-up to Orb. But at the same time, I had just come out myself as a gay man in like 83, 84, and I was young. So the idea of doing a comic about a gay character really appealed to me because there weren't any out at the time. In the mid-'80s, early '80s, there were no comics about gay people out there. The one that I did like was Matt Groening's Akbar and Jeff comics, which are part of the Life in Hell series, which were a gay couple in fezzes running around. And I loved those. And I thought, we should have more of these. So I started kicking around the idea of a story of a young gay man running around the city. And I sketched it out, and a lot of it was what I was going through at the time, going to clubs and bars and meeting people, and this whole concept of kind of coming out in New York City in 1985. So I started working on it, and then my health kind of went sour, and I got a job, and things kind of veered me off from kind of working on the comics. So I did a lot of notes, but I couldn't actually sit down and do it. So I put it aside, and I would come back to this concept of this gay male in the city concept over the next bunch of years. And it wasn't until probably, 20 years later that I kind of said, okay, I'm going to actually do this. I had done all these other projects, all these other things. I was doing web design and graphics and all sorts of stuff. And I came across, I was sketching it out, and I kind of had it done. The character's name was going to be Sam, and he was going to basically get the same thing. The same concept was still kicking around. He was going to work in an office. He was going to do stuff. And I came across, I don't know if you folks are familiar with the works of Tim Fish. He's a gay cartoonist and he does a series called Cavalcade of Boys. I came across his work around 2010, and he had done the same thing I was looking at doing. These gay slice of life with a bunch of male characters running around. I'm like, and I read it and just fell in love with it. So this is amazing. So that got me kind of thinking, okay, wait a minute, let's quit goofing around and actually maybe do something. So I sat down and said, okay, we're going to actually do the comic. Um, it, uh, it was what I decided to do at the time. Was we said we had played hockey together, and I had played softball back in the '90s. And I thought, why not have Casey play sports? We'll do that as a framework because I really didn't want to do an office comic, and then I was kind of I didn't want to do the same stuff that Tim had done. Mm-hmm. So I said, okay, I can't really do that. It's already been done. So I'll do this instead. So I put him in comics. I put him in sports. The original idea was he has an ex, and he and his ex are on opposing teams on the softball league. That was the original concept of the comic. And I had all these stories going on about the boyfriend, the ex-boyfriend being all needy, and Casey was going to be the rational one, and it wasn't working. So I came up with the idea instead of having him established in softball. I had Casey comes out of the relationship and needs something to do to meet new people because he's been in this relationship since he was a kid, and so now he's kind of on his own. And his best friend Dougie tells him you should join a sports league. So he then goes to a sports ball and tries out all the different sports. So the idea was going to be we'd see Casey playing softball, Casey playing soccer, Casey playing rugby, Casey playing football, Casey playing hockey. And this was going to be the basis of the comic. And we'd see people that he'd meet along the way. And I really liked this idea. The first comics, if you look at the strips, you look at the early ones, you'll see it. You'll see bowling and the whole thing. But when he played softball, something happened. I created a character, Joey, who had a crush on Casey. And the strips in which Joey was crushing on Casey became very popular. And Joey became this breakout character that the readers really liked. So it started veering towards more kind of romance soap opera, and I stayed with the softball team. So instead of Casey playing softball for a few weeks and then playing football, he stayed with softball. So we stayed with the Anvil team, which is the name of the softball team. And we stayed there for a while. And it kind of morphed into more of the romantic soap opera that it's become, as opposed to this kind of sports gag thing.
Okay. Yeah. He's played other stuff along the way. Like, obviously, some of my favorites of the strip were the hockey wedding.
The hockey wedding was
on
a fun one. Yeah, his friend Spencer is the hockey player in the strip, and he originally, I think, in the second or third year of the strip, second year I think it was, he convinces Casey and Joey to help fill in for the Blasters hockey team, and Casey, of course, he can skate, but Joey is a superstar and does great. So we had that hockey story, and then when we did the wedding story, my friend, our friend Mike Marsico, you know Mike.
Oh yeah.
We had a running gag about doing a hockey tournament on the beach at Fire Island. We talked about this for years.
Yes, we did.
The Fire Island Invitational, and it was going to be amazing. So when I was putting the wedding together, and I said, okay, the wedding will take place at the beach house that they all share on Fire Island. I said, well, we'll have them play hockey on the beach.
It's much easier to pull off in the comics than it is in reality.
It was very easy to pull off in the comic, although it's because you're drawing a rink in the middle of sand with glass walls, and you're hoping that people understand that it's enclosed in glass, and you're trying to do all this stuff. It was a fun bunch of comic strips to do. The hockey on the beach was actually a lot of fun. I've been kicking around ideas. I'm trying to get Casey on a basketball court now. I keep coming up with ideas where he and his friend Troy plays basketball with his buddies and needs someone to fill in again, and trying to bring Casey back to that concept where he tries different sports.
Connected to that, what's your process for coming up with the stories, and how long do most of them take to play out?
Well, generally a story will take place over about 3 or 4 weeks. So that's about 3 or 4 strips. What I tend to do is I'll sit there and say, okay, what would I like to see Casey do? And that was the original concept. And again, it was let's do a comic about bowling. Let's do a comic about playing pool. Let's go visit his ex-boyfriend. And so I would basically sketch out a story idea and say, this is the framework of how this is going to work. We're going to have our setup comic. We're going to have our comic where we kind of deal with what's been happening. And depending on what happens, maybe that'll go 2 or 3 weeks. Maybe that might go 1 or 2 weeks, and then we'll have a conclusion. So it'll be about 3 or 4. And you sketch it out and kind of see how it goes. What happens is I tend to work week to week with a loose framework. So the story, like for example, the story we just did, The Space Dream, was supposed to be 3 weeks in December. Basically, boom, boom, boom. And I had the 3 comics sketched out. Here's what's going to happen. Boom, boom, boom. They want to go to Chicago. They get captured. They escape. Done. It ran 10 weeks because every week I kept adding more bits and gags and thinking, okay, this will be fun. This will be fun. This will be fun. And so 10 weeks later, the story finally finishes. And that happens a lot. I had a skiing story that was supposed to run 2 weeks. It ran 5. These things happen. I try to keep it loose. That way we just kind of see where the characters go. The original hockey script, the original hockey story, when they filled in with the blasters, that was one of the few times I sat there and said, okay, it's going to be 10 comics, and I wrote 10 comics, and it finished and started with the 10 comics that I wrote. The reason that worked so well is I was in jury duty at the time. And so when I was sitting in jury duty, I would sketch out the stories, and I just basically did the entire thing when I was in jury duty. So that one went out exactly as planned, and that was one of the only ones that did that. Generally, it's much more freeform.
Okay.
And now, of course, today, I'm sitting here trying to come up with the next story since the Space Dream wrapped up.
Right.
I think we're going
and the
to
Space Dream, it had to have been a lot of fun. Like, I'm a sci-fi geek, a lot like you are. So you've got this Star Wars, Star Trek mashup thing going on that then Battlestar Galactica falls into it. Lost in Space shows up. Just all of these different characters from all this stuff that I grew up on. Just boom, there they all are.
It was a lot of fun to do. I've kind of seeded things in the course of this the comic that Casey's kind of a geek. We had a Lord of the Rings comic a while back. When Man of Steel came out, there was a comic where our coworkers want Casey to play on the office softball team, and he can't make it because he's going to see Man of Steel, that kind of thing. So we had little bits and pieces in there. But for this, I kind of thought, why not? Because I thought, why not do this as a way to the new Star Wars movie was coming out. So I said, okay, we'll do a comic for the new Star Wars movie. And now Casey's current boyfriend is going away to Chicago for the cabaret gig that he's got. And Casey's nervous about it. So I said, okay, we're going to have Casey go to Chicago. Rather than have him go to Chicago, we'll do it as a Space Dream when he's trying to get to Chicago. And that was the original concept. He was supposed to go, get captured, escape, and go to Chicago. 1, 2, 3 comics. Boom, boom, boom. And it became more fun. The one with the droids was my favorite one to do, with the panel with the Cylon and Bender and the Lost in Space robot. that was a fun one to do. It took a lot of self-control not to do just nothing but every science fiction thing I can think of. I had all these images of sci-fi robots downloaded, so I would have references, and I'm like, okay, which ones am I going to use? How many panels am I going to do? I said, well, so I finally settled on one panel.
Yeah, and just put them all in there.
Yeah.
So generally, Casey's 9 panels. What's involved in generating 9 panels for you? I mean, briefly describe it for folks who may not be familiar with the process of drawing and producing a comic.
I do things the old-fashioned way. A lot of folks work digitally. I am making that move to digital, but right now I do it pen and ink. So basically what you do is you write your script and you come up with what you're going to do, and you sketch it out, and you say, okay, how many panels do I need? Bang, bang, bang. Then you block out your paper with your panels on it, and you then pencil everything in, do your finished pencils, and go back and ink it. And then once everything's inked, you scan it in. I scan it into Photoshop, where I do a ton of editing. I'm cleaning up lines. I'm making people the right proportions and the right size. I do a lot of cleanup. In the early days, I was using lots of whiteout, and I'd spend forever whiting out and redrawing. But as I got better with digital editing, and now I can redraw whole figures in Photoshop, which is really handy with a mouse. So I'm very anxious to try my new graphics tablet.
Nice.
Um, so then once you get them in Photoshop, then you do your flats, which are your base colors, like a solid blue shirt, white face, blonde hair. Um, and you then, after all the flats are done, you go in and you add your highlights, your shadows, your lightens, you do your edits, where you clean up certain areas. Because when you're doing shading is when you really see where there's a problem. Are the eyes looking where they need to look? Is the mouth just teeth, or is it open? Should it be closed? Are the proportions on? That's when you really do a lot of editing. Is at that point. Then when all that's done, then you do backgrounds. Now, backgrounds can be a lot of fun and they can be a nightmare, depending on what you're doing. Then the Space Dream, I had to do a giant hangar with a shuttlecraft in it. So I had to draw the shuttlecraft, draw the hangar, make the space, and you have all these layers. Well, the beautiful part about Photoshop is you can layer all these things and then crunch them down when you're all done. So they're a lot of fun to do. I've done some very detailed backgrounds. Back in the early years, I would do these very detailed cityscape backgrounds that I would reuse over and over again because they were very hard to do. We've kind of gotten away from that, and I kind of miss them. So I'm going to be trying to bring that back because I like the idea that you feel that Casey's in the city. And I think we've kind of gotten away from that a lot, where he's been inside a lot. We won't get outside as much as we used to. And I can only use the 23rd Street background so many times. I change the color, I change the angle, I change things. Hopefully no one notices. So then you get your backgrounds done, and it's all good. You then open it in Illustrator to add all your dialogue. And one of the steps that I've taken in the last couple of years is, remember I told you about the editing phase, when you're doing the initial editing after your inks are done and you've scanned it? What I do now is I put my dialogue in there. In Photoshop is when I go through my script and put it in all the panels. And that's when I decide, does the script work? Are they saying what they need to say? Do I need to punch the script up a little bit better? It's made me a better writer because I'm actually doing my editing earlier so that if I need to make changes, I'm more aware of them. And in the old days, I used to do it at the end, and it'd be deadline, and I'd be like, I don't have time. We post in 2 hours. I got to go with this. Now I'm doing it early, which helps the writing. It also helps you with character placement, because if you've got a big bunch of dialogue and word balloons, you put it in when you're doing the editing phase, then you can say, okay, the characters need to be smaller. I need to move them down on the panel. I need to do something else to get these word balloons in to get this dialogue to work and to make the panel look better, so that I'm not doing a bunch of post-editing or changing dialogue to fit the panels, which is what I used to do back in the early days. So that works out really well. So then at the end, you have your Illustrator format with all your dialogue on it, your finished graphic. You flatten that out, you send it out as a JPEG, and you post it on the website. I use a hosted website through using WordPress themes on who's my carrier? My carrier is Just Host. I'll give them a plug. And so yeah, I pay for an annual fee to have them host my site, which is great. I don't have to think about it. They take care of everything for me. I've only had one service issue. That was last year, where the comic was down for about 3 days, and I was like, "What's happening?" I had people writing me, "Your comic's down."
Yeah, I know.
But it's been pretty good. And there's other things you can do. You can post for free on certain other sites, but I choose to have my dedicated site, which I think works well. But that's pretty much the process. As I said, I have this new fancy graphic tablet. There you go.
Nice. It looks very sleek.
It is very sleek, and it's great because the screen, it has a screen on it. So the screen comes up, and I can work right there directly on the screen, and it'll transfer to the Photoshop. So hopefully it'll speed up the drawing process, because as I pointed out, with doing sketches and then the original pencils and then the finished pencils and the ink, you're drawing sometimes some things 4 times before you ever get to the point where you're doing any of the coloring. And it's a very slow process. A full color page takes time to do. And because I have a day job, it's not like I can spend hours every day working on the page. So I'm hoping that this will speed up the process. We can make that big move to twice a week, which is
that'd be awesome.
yeah. I'd
I
like to
would
get
love
back.
that.
Mind you, I'd like to get back to once a week. Little steps. We'll get back to once a week, and then we'll do twice a week.
So with over 200 strips out already, should new readers feel cautious about just jumping in, or are there things they need to know in the backlog?
200 comics goes pretty quick. If you want to read if you want to read the archive, it's it's a good hour maybe to go through and read them through. I try to keep the story self-contained. There's a cast list that needs to be updated. I freely admit it, that people can look at, get an idea of who people are. There's some of the newer characters aren't in that cast list, and so I do need to update that. But no, I think a new reader can easily come in and go through. We have an archive there they can poke through. I'm going to be restructuring the site and adding chapters, because when I started, it hadn't really occurred to me that I should do chapters. Now I'm kind of realizing as we've moved along, chapters might be more helpful. So you'd have like Space Dream chapter, Hockey Wedding chapter, Bowling chapter, those kind of things. So people can go to a chapter and understand and can read chapters that would help them follow along more than having to just go to the archive and start all the way back with one and then read all the way forward. They can see breaks, more natural breaks, where they can read a story and say, oh, gang plays pool. Oh, new softball season, that kind of thing. And so we're going to be restructuring that. I always say we. I don't know who this other person is, but
it's that virtual staff you've got.
It is that virtual staff, Casey Central.
And I showed at the beginning, you got the compilation book.
Yes.
That you put out. I think this came out in 2014?
That came out in 2014. Yeah, I put that out, 2 years ago.
And then I think you said you were working on another one as well.
Yeah, the first book covered the first 100 strips, I think it was. Covered the first 2 years, and it's good. It's a fun read. What I had to do to put that together was I had to go back and re-edit the first few comics because they were really rough, and in print they looked awful. So I had to go back in and redo a lot of the art and the process of how I put the art. I actually used the original art, but I rescanned it and did everything more properly, so it looked better. One of the things also about doing the first book that was a challenge was the first year of Casey saw lots of different formats. There was the 9-panel format. There was a 6-panel format. There was a 12-panel format. It was really long. It was really tall. It was wide. It was because I really didn't know what I was doing that first year. And so trying to put that all in the book that fit a format, the book ended up being slightly bigger than I would have liked in terms of size. Mm-hmm. So the second book, now we've had an established format now for 3 years. So now the established book is going to be slightly smaller, but it'll cover everything up to the Space Dream, and actually the comics that I'm doing now as a kind of an epilogue to that, as we then close that.
Because Casey will go to Chicago.
Casey will be going to Chicago. That's actually one of the big story arcs coming up, is Casey going to Chicago. There's a couple of other big story arcs kind of in the works.
Do you want to tease out?
Well, we all know Joey lost his job at the cable company and will be ending up working at the cupcake shop with Dougie. Nate is going to be making a reappearance with his new boyfriend and trying to get Dougie into a new business venture. One of the things I'm trying to do is focus a little bit more on some of the supporting characters, because we just did this big Casey arc, and before that we did a big Joey arc, and so I'm going to try to bring some of the other characters into the forefront a little bit more, at least for a short period of time. Mm-hmm. But we will be going to Chicago. I have to do a lot of photo references to see what Chicago looks like, so that'll be fun to do those backgrounds again that I talked about.
Yeah, you wanted new backgrounds, so there you go.
Yeah.
Any advice for anybody who would be looking to start a digital comic?
Well, a couple of things. There are thousands of comics out there. And so what you want to make sure you do is have a good concept and good art and be committed to doing it. once you get going, readers expect consistent output. That's how you build an audience. So if you go out there with something and you're posting like once a month or once every couple of weeks, it's kind of hard to build an audience. You want to be ready, build a bunch of comics, have them ready to go when you launch your site. When I launched Casey, I had 8 weeks ready to go. So when I launched, I was able to say, okay, here are those 8 weeks as I was putting everything together. And the first year was a little rough. I didn't have a consistent update schedule, and that hurt. But then we kind of hit our stride, and we went 2 solid years without missing a weekly update, which helped build the audience. Figure out what you want to do, figure out what your story is, and then start doing the work. Really, I mean, comics can be hard, especially if you have a day job, to stay on them. And you've got this comic, you put all this work into it, you put it online, and you look at your numbers and you go, oh, that's disappointing. And it can be frustrating. So you have to understand you're starting out against thousands of comics that are established and already have an audience, and you say you need to build your audience. And there's lots of ways to do that. You can join comic collectives, things like Ink Outbreak and My Comic Rocket will post your comic alongside all these other comics and then redirect people to your site, which is really handy. You can buy ads and post them on other comics that are similar to yours. Let's say you do a comic about horse wizards. So you want to say, okay, I need comics about horses and wizards. I'm going to advertise on those about this wonderful horse wizard comic I have. And so that's a good way to get people to come see your comic, because that's the kind of the key. Once you've got it up there, you have to utilize your advertising tools, your collective site tools, and your social media tools to get people to look at it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And,
sounds a lot like what authors go through.
It's exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same thing.
Are there other comics out there that if people fall in love with Casey that you'd recommend that they check out?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. That's a very good question. If people are looking for LGBT-themed comics, there are several out there. There are tons of them out there. A good resource for that on Tumblr is called the Slash Pile, which is a big archive of LGBT-themed webcomics. So that's a good resource to go to find things. Jay Fuller, who does Boy in Pink Earmuffs, has a website of also of LGBT webcomics. Actually, if you type in Google search LGBT webcomics, his page is the first one that comes up, and it's a big list of comics that have gay characters as their main thrust. So there's a lot of good stuff there too. A wonderful comic. If you like my comic, you will love Tony Breed's work. He does a comic called Muddler's Beat, and it is one of the most brilliant comics out there. And before that, the comic was called Finn and Charlie Are Hitched. It's about a gay married couple and slice of life stuff. And it's beautiful artwork and a great comic, very funny. Those are 2 that I would recommend. There are others. There's a very popular comic called Questionable Content by Jeff Jocks, which is a hugely successful comic that my comic is similar in style to. It's a full page of color, people going about their daily lives. So there's that. There's a ton of others. I'm just drawing a blank right now because
you gave us quite a few.
That's one of the new questions.
That is a new question. Yeah, didn't prep you for that one. So besides Rainbow Book Fair, where can fans find you this year?
Well, this year I'm kind of staying local. Last year I made trips out to Massachusetts and Texas. This year I'm staying local. I will be at FlameCon in August in Brooklyn. And that's Geeks Out Organization's LGBT-themed Comic-Con. Last year was their first year, and it was very successful. This year is going to be even bigger. Tickets are still available at flamecon.org. I will be there in August. I've submitted an application for the Queer Comic Expo in San Francisco in June. Even though I said I wasn't going to travel, I said, oh, wait, this is another gay show, so I want to do that. We'll see if I get it. And then if I get it, I have to see if I can afford to go.
Okay. If you come out there, let me know because we'll come down and say hi.
I will definitely let you know. My goal is to have the second book ready for FlameCon. If I go to San Francisco, I may have to speed that schedule up to try to have a book ready in June. That's a tough call, so I have to see what's going on with that.
Okay.
I may be launching a Kickstarter for the second book. I haven't decided yet. We're going to do Kickstarter or we're going to do self-publishing again. I haven't made up my mind on that. Part of me wants to try the Kickstarter because that'd be kind of a fun thing to do that I haven't really done before. I will be at the Mocha Fest next week, but I don't know if this is going to air before next week. So
this will air April 3rd, I think it is.
April 3rd.
The Monday before.
I'm at the Mocha Fest. So if you're watching this and it's Sunday, April 3rd, go to the Mocha Festival in New York City. Tell them you saw me on this podcast.
Or just come find us the following Saturday.
That's true.
So, question of the week. We always ask a question on the podcast, and then when we have guests, we give them that question. And this week's question, unfortunately not comic-based, it's how often do you browse a physical bookstore for books?
For books. For comics and graphic novels, every couple of weeks. Wednesday is, of course, New Comic Book Day. And so I used to go every Wednesday and look at the new books, especially when Marvel was doing the Secret Wars and they were launching new titles in the New 52 for DC. And I would go every Wednesday to see what was new. For print books, I don't get out that often to do that because I no longer commute. When I used to take the train, I read books like crazy. I was the guy with the big book, reading on the train every day. But now I walk to work, and so it's more difficult to read, and so I've got tons of books here in the house. So I don't get to bookstores to look at print books that often anymore, which is frustrating because I love reading. I just don't have as much time as I used to.
So you just need to move again so you can have a commute where you can read a book.
There's something to be said for that. I kind of miss it.
So now you get the chance to ask our listeners a question.
You
get the chance to ask our listeners a question.
Oh, well, if the listeners are interested in comics, what comics do they like to read online? Do they like long form? Do they like gag-a-day? Are they into the sci-fi epics? That kind of thing.
Okay. We will give that a go and see what people come back with.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, Bob, thank you so much for coming on and joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I look forward to seeing you on Saturday at the book fair. Everybody should come out and see us. We're sharing a table. We'll kind of be the sporting table between my hat trick books and Casey.